Hello, my name's Mick Child. I'm director of Forge Photography Limited, and today we're going to be talking about semi-manual mode TV or S, which is shutter speed. So many photographers out there will tell you that unless you shoot in manual, you're not a proper photographer. Well, that's just not true. You know, just because you're technical with a camera and you can shoot full manual doesn't mean that you know how to compose a picture, for instance. What we're going to do today is that we're going to be looking at this semi-manual mode. We're going to be controlling our shutter speed. Now, I said the other day, being able to use a semi-manual mode is really good, because if we've got changing light that's happening all the time because your sun's going behind the clouds and what have you, you don't want to be messing all the time and thinking about all the different settings that you've got to do, especially if the shot that you're doing, say a sports shot or something, the family running around or something like that, where you're doing kids and that kind of thing. You don't want to be spending lots of time thinking about what settings you've got on your camera. You actually want to be spending time thinking about how you're going to compose the image, how you're going to compose the scene. And that's much better way to spend your time. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my lens hood onto my lens. Remember, we use the lens hood to stop the glass from getting scratched. It's really, really important. Second thing I'm going to do now then is switch on my camera, and I'm going to check that auto ISO is selected. The two settings that we want today are TV or S for the shutter speed and auto ISO. So hopefully you've got those selected now. We can carry on and start thinking about some images. So this Friday will be Good Friday, so we won't be putting out a tutorial on this Friday, and we probably won't do one next Tuesday because we'll be celebrating the weekend. What I'll do is I'll look to get one out probably Friday next week. Now, I said to you the other day that we'd set a rule, and that rule would be that we didn't shoot less than 1/100th of a second shutter speed. We're going to break that rule a little bit today, because we're going to be taking a picture, hopefully, of Izzy riding her bike past me whilst I capture some motion blur in the background. Motion blur is when you get a really, really sharp image of your subject, but the background is blurred to give that feeling of motion. And that's what we're going to try and get. The only thing is, I've tried an experiment with Izzy, and she can't ride a bike fast enough in the area that we've got to be able to get the blur at 1/100th of a second. So we're going to have to break that rule, and today we're going to shoot at 1/50th of a second to capture that nice blur in the background. You'll find that you've got a vast range of shutter speeds on your camera. Typically you'll go from 30 seconds exposure without a trigger on it right up to something like 1/8000th of a second, which is very, very fast. And the reason you've got that big range is that there's a whole range of different light situations that we might want to take a photo in. Also, there's different types of action that you might need to capture. So for instance, I've got a 35mm lens on here, so I really want sort of slower shutter speeds, typically 1/50th of a second up to 1/250th of a second for sort of general photography that I'm doing. Then you've got to consider if it's an action shot or something that's moving that you don't actually want motion blur on. You know, for rugby and that kind of thing, I've always shot at around about 1/400th to 1/500th of a second to freeze the action. But for canoeing, for instance, where I want to capture water droplets coming from their blade, I might use something as high as 1/3200th of a second. Back in 2013, after a long break, I started to get really back into my photography, and I was lucky enough to be featured as an apprentice in one of the UK's photography magazines. And I went down to Lee Valley to take some photos of Etienne Stott, a friend of mine who the previous year had won gold in the canoeing at the Olympics. And while I was down there, Canon had lent us an f2.8 400mm lens. It was absolutely beautiful, about £7,000 worth of equipment, which I could never afford. And under the instruction of a really, really good Olympic photographer, Anthony Edmonds, I was able to get some absolutely cracking shots, some of which you can see now. Right, a quick check of my camera to make sure I'm in TV, which I am. Now I'll adjust my shutter speed down to 1/50th of a second. I'm just checking that I'm in auto ISO, and now I can ask Izzy to ride a bike in front of me as fast as she can, and we'll see if we can get a motion blur shot. Okay, so I've asked Izzy to ride her bike sort of straight past me here. I don't want to come in towards me because that adds another dynamic, and it's going to be really difficult to try and film that today. But I'm going to get her to ride straight past. She is being a little bit temperamental, They always say, don't they, don't work with children or animals. Absolutely right in the film industry, let me tell you. Right, Izzy, are you ready? Here she comes. Let's hope we can nail this one. Now you'll notice that the shot that I did there, I only took one shot. So what I did, my technique there was to actually do this. So watch me. I'm focusing as she comes by. I press, but I keep going. Do you notice that? I keep going. And that's the key. You want to actually get the speed of the subject that's moving past you. You want to engage with that subject and then keep moving as the subject goes past. So we've had a number of challenges today. One of them is that we're shooting at a very slow shutter speed, which means that we need to be really, really spot on with our focusing and our movement as we take the shot as the person goes past us. And the second thing, of course, never working with animals or children. Very, very difficult trying to persuade Izzy to ride up and down. But thank you, Izzy, for doing that. I really, really appreciate you doing that. And hopefully you've got an idea of how we can get motion blur by slowing the shutter speed down. What I want you to do over the weekend is go away, try different shutter speeds and really give it a go, experiment. What I'd say is don't go less than 1/50th of a second though, unless you are actually on top of a tripod. And then you probably only want to be going less than 1/50th of a second if it's getting quite dark, you know, sort of in the evening or very early in the morning. Okay, so we'll do a couple more lessons before we wrap this series up. We'll be having a look at ISO, which will be fun. That'll be the next lesson. And then after that, we'll switch to full manual and we'll talk about how we adjust the settings in full manual so that will be shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. All right, don't forget to subscribe, push the bell, and we'll see you very soon. Have a lovely Easter. See ya.